Hi there, in this video we're going to cover four-wheel drive tyre pressures. Now tyre pressures are pretty critical when you go off-road. Depending on the different terrain, you'll have to adjust the tyre pressures to suit. So the benefits of reducing tyre pressure is to actually increase the track or the length of the wheel, not necessarily the width, and that gives you more grip and more traction. And less likely for the four-wheel drive to dig into the ground or the track. But also you reduce the likeliness of a puncture. So if you can imagine a very inflated balloon and a very deflated balloon, the inflated balloon is a lot easier to burst. And improves tyre life when off-road as well. Fuel economy, ride comfort, and helps to reduce track damage. Now some of the consequences with lowering your tyre pressure is the actual bead of the tyre can come off the rim. So you have to reduce your speed and you have to avoid quick, sharp turns. And the other catch is if you go too low, the actual rim can spin inside the tyre and therefore you don't go anywhere. When you reduce your tyre pressures, reduce your maximum speed. So for example, I typically run 40 PSI at highway terrain. So maximum speed of about 110 kilometers legally. Now if I go down to 30 PSI, I've reduced the tyre pressure by 25%. So my speed should also be reduced by 25%. So instead of 110 kilometers, looking at about 83 kilometers an hour now. And again, just be mindful, whatever pressure you reduce, that percentage, you should also reduce in your speed. Now, every vehicle is different depending on weight, depending on the tyre and its construction. So now we're going to look at some common pressures and see how it impacts on the footprint of the wheel. So to start off with, we're running 40 PSI, which is your typical highway pressure. So we'll reduce it down to 30 and see what impact it has on the track. So now we're at 30 PSI, and as you can tell by the video, the actual track or the length of the rubber has increased. So typical highway pressure is between 30 and 40 PSI, depending on the tyre, depending on the vehicle. So let's go down to 20 and see what that looks like. So now we've reduced it down to about 20 PSI. And you can see, not only is the tyre bulging a little bit, it's also increased in track or length again. So in terrain like this, I typically run tyre pressures between 20 and 30 PSI. Halfway, about 25 PSI is usually a good start. And if you need any more, just reduce it down as you go. So that's 20. Now let's go down to 15 and have a look at that. So now we're at about 15 PSI. And you can see the increase in track that extra 5 PSI we've let out has made. Every PSI will make a significant increase in traction and difference to the tyre. Now between 15 and 20 PSI is a good pressure for mud, for snow and for sand. Typically for sand I'd run about 18 PSI, and if I think I need more grip, I'll reduce it down further. Let's go down now to 10 PSI and see what that looks like. So now we're down to 10 PSI. And again, you can also see that increase in track or the length of the actual wheel. Now, a pressure like this is more like an emergency pressure somewhere on the beach, on sand, soft sand. You typically want to run between 10 and 15 as an emergency pressure. But if need be, you can run as low as 8. But you also run that risk of the tyre coming off the rim. So it's more just to highlight now in this video what it does look like and the increase in track. So we're going to go down to 5 PSI as our last pressure and we'll see what that looks like. So now we're at about 5 or 6 PSI and you'll notice that the pressure isn't even registering on our inflation gauge. So this is more like an emergency pressure, as mentioned before, on the beach. And you'd want to keep your wheels dead straight when you're running pressures like this. You can see as well that there's quite a bit of a bulge in the track width. That also makes it susceptible to sharp rocks hitting it and puncturing it. So you'd want a good strong tyre like this, a light track tyre, to make sure that you try and avoid any punctures. Now it's important when you're deflating your tyres, depending on the terrain, that you've also got a means to pump them back up. So I highly recommend you get yourself a good quality air compressor to do the job. Now we're going to reinflate the tyre back to about 24-25 psi. So as a recap of this video, these are my general recommendations for different terrains. So between 30 and 40 psi is where you'd run your highway terrain bitumen road pressures. Between 25 and 30 psi is your gravel and dirt roads. 20 to 25 psi is your rocky and your muddy terrain. Between 50 and 20 psi is your muddy and sand terrain. Between 10 and 15 psi is your soft sand and soft mud terrain. And anything below 10, between 5 and 10, is your emergency pressures. So I hope you found this video informative. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thanks for watching.